Can I just say, before we start, that it wasn't only me making that film, and that we drew on a lot of talented expertise. Helena Appio, the director, was brilliant, sensitive. Neil Ferguson, editor, tremendous. And of course, Sadie. And Sadie and myself have been involved in films on the Kurds for many, many years. But there was also another team there behind the scenes. As you saw, the list is long, long, long. I mean, the people in Hammersmith were brilliant. Many, many Kurds amongst them, and also in Kurdistan itself. So it's not just me, it's a big team effort with a lot of talented people.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you came to this, how you and the team came to this particular story and this particular film.
Well, I've been filming in Kurdistan actually since the 1981, and so been aware of the build-up to Anfal during that period. But in 1991, I was in Kurdistan, covering the uprising. And I was with an Iraqi dissident, well-known, Kinan Makir, and we went to near Sulaymaniyah to interview Timur. He told us an amazing story, and we produced a film for the BBC and also for PBS in the States. About 15, 16 years later, I happened to be driving through areas near Kalar, near Arab Iraq, and chanced upon Kulajo. And our guide said, that's Timur's village. So I was really surprised because I thought all of Timur's village had actually been destroyed, and was really pleasantly surprised to see that half of it had actually survived. So we got out, there was someone shepherding the sheep, and it was Raouf, it was Timur's uncle. So he was very hospitable, and we took up contact, and we then started to do the Kurdistan Memory Program. And I decided it would be a very, very good idea if we took Kulajo as a pilot for the project. So we ended up going to Kulajo for a month to 6 weeks, interviewing people. And in that one village, I think we did the best part of 50 or 60 interviews, which is an awful lot. And we got to know them very, very well. And then the decision was made to use this material and make a documentary out of it. Now, it's quite a complicated venture because it's not that simple just to do a 54-minute documentary just on testimony. So we've used, we do actually have an extensive archive of material that I've collected over the years and filmed. I mean, I filmed in the region, an awful lot. And so we've constructed with Helena and Neil's help and Sadie's help, and the producer, Joel Wickham's help as well, the narrative that you have just seen.
The archive material that's contained in that film that you traced all comes from the story of that village, and the people moving are from there?
All of them are from that village, and it just seemed such an obvious idea, but I think an effective idea, to take one small village and to trace what happened to them and to show the larger picture of Anfal.
And in terms of the interviewing process itself, you've been doing an extensive set of these kinds of interviews. There's an extraordinary emotional power in that single testimony, but there must also be a considerable toll on the interviewers over time.
It's very, very difficult because trauma is not something that just you listen and then you go back to the office and you edit and so on, but trauma does transfer itself. It's like an electric cable. It just goes, if you engage with people, automatically it transfers to you. And what we found was that initially we're doing 6-week stints in the villages. The Kurdistan Memory Program is not only about Kulajo, it extends into areas all around Kurdistan, from Badinan, just south of the Turkish border. We cover all 8 military campaigns, and that goes right down to Gamian, to near Kirkuk. It's everywhere. But we found initially that, not initially, that after, if you spend longer than 3 weeks doing it, if the team is there for longer than that, people do become very stressed, emotionally exhausted by the process. And it's something that builds and builds and builds. And hearing those stories this afternoon, for example, brings it all back. It just reawakens the emotions in your head. And there are some, we've probably now got the best part of 300 films that we've compiled from our filming. And what that entails is going and doing a lengthy interview. At the beginning, it could go as long as 3 hours. Now we try and make it about an hour. And then we cut a series of films out of that called vignettes. You saw 1 or 2 of them this afternoon. And we've amassed about 300 of those. We probably have another 40 or 50 to do. And then I think Anfal for us, we will need to start moving on to other topics, like the Feli Kurds, the missing Barzanis, etc., etc. But it is a very tough process, simply because trauma is such a powerful thing, and it's not something that just stays within the person who is traumatized. It communicates itself.
One of the great challenges with dealing with trauma is the place that it stays in the memory of the victim. That one of the problems with the traumatic event is it's very difficult to process that memory.
Yeah.
You must have encountered, because this is not, many of these people will have been interviewed by you for the first time.
Yeah.
No one else has been there to talk to them. Maybe this is, did you get the feeling that in many cases this was the first time that they had described or created a narrative of these events?
No, I didn't. Because what happens is that when people are traumatized, they tend to speak an enormous amount about the event. And the difficulty is deconstructing what absolutely happened, specifically happened. Because within the group experience, they'll be taking on the experience of other people within that group. So you may find sort of events creeping in that are not necessarily what they've experienced. I'll give you one example. The story of the black dogs. There are various people who think that that story is apocryphal. I actually think it genuinely happened. But because I've been to Nubra Salman, I've seen the conditions of the graves, and really it's very difficult to dig a deep grave there. So bodies would be placed inside maybe a shallow, very shallow grave, then covered with stones. And there were dogs there that would come and take it and take the body and rip it to pieces and so on. I'm pretty convinced that did happen. Other people who were associated with the Anfal survivors believe that a lot of this is made up. Now, what actually happens in Kulajo, for example, we discovered that the children had nightmares about this black dog story. It pursues them all the time, and that will go down in folklore as something that genuinely happened. I think it did, but as I say, there are others who would think that's apocryphal. But what happens when you interview people is that people often just talk as if it's a stream of consciousness. They just go woof. And for us, the lesson has been to start controlling the interview, because initially interviewers just let it roll, just let it happen, and we just filmed and filmed and filmed. This became extremely difficult when we're trying to piece together a story. So the lesson we've learned is try and control the interview, break up the stream of consciousness so that people are shaken, and then we'll start telling you other details about that story. That seems to be a more successful way of conducting an interview.
There's a very famous moment in the trial of Eichmann when a witness comes in and says that he is from planet Auschwitz.
Yeah.
And he begins to give testimony, and then he realizes that he's in the presence of Eichmann, and he faints. And there's many testimonies of people who are unable to face the German language or Germany. It's like that place is another planet. But here you have people who fought to return and are back in their original villages, and it was very important for them to return. What do people say about that?
I think a lot of people have great problems returning to the village. A lot of people don't. And there are now many, many villages which are stripped of their young people, and you just have an older community living there. A lot of them, you have nowhere else to go. But returning, I mean, Ismet, who in that film I think is an absolutely extraordinary character, she saw Timur talking to us around the house where he used to live with his parents. And I just saw her at the corner of my eye breaking up in tears, in floods of tears, becoming really hysterical. Now, Ismet claims to see ghosts in the fields. She can't go into the fields because she sees the people there. And she is super sensitive. She's got a poetic soul, in my opinion. But boy, is she alive to what's happening. So certain people find it very difficult to go back to the old village. And so what happens is you've got to drift towards the cities, which is a problem in its own right, because a lot of the traditional cultures of Kurdistan grew in the villages, textiles and so on, and that is largely stopped, although there are some attempts to rebuild it. But it's a thing where the government is, I think, pretty sensitive to what's going on, is trying to help, although obviously more could be done. But it's a sort of it's a very scarred society. I mean, we're talking, I don't know how many people actually disappeared and died. I personally think it's probably more like 110,000, something like that. It may be more. There doesn't appear to be any accurate data on the figures. But you're talking of a traumatized community that probably reaches 1 million. Now, Kurdistan is not a big community. I don't know, maybe 4.5 million, maybe 5. And if you've got 20 or 25% of it suffering from the effects of trauma, then you've got a very damaged community. And people really do have to be, I mean, the authorities really have to be very sensitive to this, and I think they are. But there are key issues. Obviously, money is one of them, and compensation is really important, and this is why recognition of the genocide internationally is important, so that people can maybe have more hope of getting compensation. But there are other issues. Justice is one of them. And one of the most difficult things for people is the problem of the Jash. People see these people living in their own environment who were responsible for a lot that happened to them, and responsible for enormous cruelty. Now, if that were me, I'd be wanting immediate justice and it sorted. But it's a very, very complex situation, because with the uprising, unless an accommodation had been reached with the Jash, and the figures we have are about 300,000 Jash, talking maybe 15,000 Peshmerga, if the Jash had gone back with Saddam, it wouldn't have been possible to have an uprising. So the authorities have a very delicate situation to deal with. On the other hand, there's a very deep need within the Anfal community that some sort of solution is reached, some sort of way of reconciling, with the past. Now, how that's done, I have no idea, but something needs to be done in that direction.
There's a very interesting project going on at the moment in Fiji, where members from the authoritarian government who were responsible for crimes against humanity and victims are making short films together. Is there, in the long run, the possibility that the Memory Project would extend to incorporate the JASH in, and possibly the of using film as a way of having those kind of conversations, or are you already doing that?
It's extremely difficult. We went to interview one JASH leader, and he mistakenly believed that we wanted to talk us about general politics, and there was a misunderstanding, but we started talking about the real subject, and just froze, you know, so we couldn't pursue it. There are one or two people who will talk, but often what they say is, you know, it's a sort of litany. We did everything we could to help the Peshmerga, to save the families. And there were actually a number of JASH who were really, really helpful, who did their utmost to help. But the really bad ones are in a different league. They brought great cruelty to the lives of these farming communities.
What's the plan with this extraordinary film, Gwynne? And where is it going to be shown? We as a group, how can we help to get it shown more widely?
The film is going to be shown on Al Jazeera. It'll be shown on their English service, on the Turkish service, and on the Balkans service. So that's a good start. Jazeera Arabic is not going to run it, for reasons I don't know. But we will make attempts to get it across the Middle East. Certainly in Kurdistan, I'm sure it will run. And but we would love to see it appearing on Al Arabiya, on BBC Arabic service, but there's no movement on that quite yet.
Well, if anybody is here from BBC Arabic service, please see Gwynne afterwards.
Yeah.
And the BBC and the British networks as well. We're going to draw it to a close.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking Gwynne.